Okay, hello everyone. Good to have your participation again today in our final session of this four-part program. As usual, I'm just going to begin by asking you to let me know if you can hear me okay. So if you can just put your name or yes or no in the comments box, that would be good. Perfect. Okay, good. All right, so to continue, by now, if you've been participating in these workshops, you'll know who I am. But if you're new, I'm friend and brother disciple of Ryan Kursek, and he invited me to do this program. So I've been offering this for the last 3 Saturdays, and this is the final program in this workshop, the final workshop in this program. So to begin, we can just do a little short meditation practice. This is going to be brief, 4 or 5 minutes, because it's my intention to do a guided meditation towards the end of this session. So if you just find a comfortable upright position and close your eyes and breathe in deeply, filling your lungs, and exhale. And just do this one more time and relax. Allow your inner gaze to settle on that point in the center of your forehead, your Ajna chakra, your mind's eye. And this is a short meditative reflection, but still we can set our intention, which is to shift our focus so that we can experience clarified awareness. And we can do this simply by disregarding all other thoughts which are occurring. With conscious intention, we can look into our mind's eye and stay focused on our natural, clarified, pure state of consciousness. And to conclude, we can simply breathe in deeply and relax. And we can return our awareness to the workshop at hand. Okay. So in the previous workshops, I've done, I've began with a meditation practice, encouraging you in your own personal practice to begin with setting the intention. Setting the intention is not to be underestimated because it's by setting our intention that we are able to become active and responsible in our practices. And last week we looked at um, the movements between our different activities and how in those transitions we're able to reclarify our awareness and set our intention once again. And so this is something which we can do both in our formal and informal practice, set the intention. And it's just the case that by setting our intention with clarified understanding of what our purpose is, of what our goal is, then we're able to be more responsible, essentially, for how that goes, how the process goes. And it's not a case that it'll always go as we want it to go, but it's just that we're able to evaluate, reflect at the end. And so I've been encouraging that in our previous sessions, and it's something I would continue to encourage as you go ahead and continue with your own sadhana, your own spiritual practice. Um, the whole objective of this program, and I have reiterated this in previous sessions too, was just to acknowledge that when we begin our commitment to the path of yoga and to experiencing yoga oneness consciousness, we are very enthused and we are very excited, usually. And we gain knowledge and we gain inspiration from listening to different teachers and reading different texts and participating in different workshops and just cultivating our own discipline in our spiritual practices. However, with time and with the, I suppose, the continuous practice, like other things in life, sometimes there's a certain amount of monotony. Um, and this is natural. You know, this is something that we experience in all aspects of life. But we want to maintain some spice, some degree of excitement in our spiritual practice. And now it sounds counterproductive to be talking about adding spice and excitement to a practice which is all about establishing a state of peace. Um, but what I mean is that it doesn't have to become boring or monotonous. And what's often talked about is the different paths of yoga, as in Jnana Yoga, the way of knowledge, a way of wisdom, and Bhakti Yoga, the way of devotion. And in here in the Kriya Yoga tradition, we talk about balancing those two as a means to having all the tools that we need to stay um, focused and effective on our path. And so that it's just a reminder that how is it best suitable for you to be able to maintain a little bit of excitement in your path. So now excitement is in inverted commas because what I'm really talking about is just a case of um, still being enthralled by every time you sit to meditate, still finding a kind of X factor when you're reading certain texts, when you are participating in life and you're reflecting on how life is an expression of pure consciousness, how that kind of moves you in ways which is just enthralling and exciting for you. Because really, the spiritual path is an expression of life, and life is exciting. And our whole existence is an expression of pure consciousness. And the whole thing is very, it's just amazing. It's fascinating. And so we we can bring that into our spiritual practice. And so with the practice of bhakti yoga, with devotion, we can do chanting, and that's very encouraging for many people. They find it's very uplifting and very positive as a spiritual practice. But in terms of even reading texts, you know, we're sometimes very we can become very program ourselves into ways of doing things which cultivates monotony. But when we read spiritual text, it's not about going through many pages and reading lots of different teachers and getting lots of exposure. It's about really making it meaningful to us. And in that, trying to make it meaningful for us is where we're able to find the excitement, because then it's something which we can personalize, something which we can take on board on an individual level in terms of our own individual practice. And that's enthralling because it's we're able to set the intention of, well, I'm going to do this spiritual practice and I'm going to reflect on it in terms of how I am processing it, how I'm applying it, how I'm utilizing it. And through that, we can um, just find more relevance in what we're doing in a very encouraging way. And so I've looked at in the previous sessions, we looked at in the first session, samadhi as a spectrum. And again, this was so that we would be able to sit to meditate and begin with our intention. And by the end of the process, we'd be able to measure where we were in terms of our degree of absorption. So we looked at that extensively. We looked in the second workshop at the 8 limbs of yoga in terms of our formal spiritual practices and also in terms of our informal practices. And again, it's just a way for us to be able to um, measure how we are applying each of these principles and measure it in terms of our own lives and our own personal self-application. So it's not just something we're reading about. It's not something which is just part of the yoga practice, but it's really something which we're embodying in our lives. And in that way, it's exciting because it's giving us this framework to measure just how effective we're being. And in and of itself, that is very motivational. And then the last session in the last workshop, um, we looked at the different transitions that occur in our day-to-day lives and also in our meditation practice. And just by paying attention to these transitions, and as I mentioned just a few moments ago, setting the intention, we're able to take on more responsibility or have a more active role in our spiritual practice. We're able to incorporate short reflective practices. We discussed these last week as a means to just become more established in self-awareness throughout the course of our day, not just in our formal practices. So the objective of today's workshop is to look at depth in meditation in relation to contemplation practices. Now, contemplation is an interesting term because obviously you know, the great philosophers were contemplatives, and they looked at how life worked, and they looked at theories to understand the universe and the world and human nature. But contemplation can be talked about in different ways and in different traditions where meditation is practiced and where spiritual practices are adhered to. Contemplation is referred to in different ways. So in the yoga tradition, it's an interesting one because I know that Ramana Maharishi talked a lot about self-inquiry, which would be a form of contemplation. And contemplation can take different forms because I think in its essence, contemplation is quite abstract. When we talk about concentration, we can understand that because it's kind of something that we're actively involved in. But contemplation is more and I'll be talking about this quite a bit in a few moments, it's more intuitive. So it's more abstract. It's less under our own control. And so there's different ways of talking about it. And so it's been referred to as self-inquiry. It's been referred to as insight meditation. I know that in Buddhist traditions, they use that term a lot. Intuitive awareness or awakening to our own inner knowledge. All of this, it's basically contemplation is helping us to move from what we know to what we don't know. And what we don't know is completely different to us, as in it's something that we haven't processed ever on a cognitive level. And so it's beyond our normal realms of ordinary thinking. And so really contemplation is the process of moving beyond the seeing the mind and body as being the be all and end all. We're able to understand them and recognize them as tools. But if to awaken to this intuitive knowing, to awaken to this inner understanding of reality, then we need to be able to transcend the body, transcend the mind. And the whole process is one of letting go. So last week and in the other sessions, we talked about continuous practice, repeated practice, and we talked about dispassionate non-attachment. Now, non-attachment, that's a whole other program. We could talk about it for, endlessly. But essentially, non-attachment is letting go, and it occurs at many different levels. So it'll occur in our formal meditation practice, and it'll occur in our lives, and it'll occur in terms of letting go of our association and identification with the body and with the mind, so that we can experience our inner knowing. We can experience our own intuitive nature, which is beyond both of those tools. So meditation comes in two parts. Meditation is made up of concentration and it's made up of contemplation. Now, concentration gets a lot of focus, um, primarily because most people, when they approach meditation, um, they're not used to how the mind works. They're not used to coming face to face with disciplining the mind. And so concentration is a skill which needs to be nurtured and mastered in order to be able to move into the space of contemplation. Now, when we first come to meditation and we hear the word concentration, we associate it with things that we do in our lives, and we associate it with reading books and being able to pay attention and all those kind of things. But we realize through the meditation process that concentration has subtle layers, and we talked about this in terms of the frames of in terms of samadhi as a framework, that it can move to more subtle levels the more experienced we become in nurturing this capacity to concentrate. So I like to think of contemplation in relation to concentration. I like to use this kind of analogy, and hopefully it'll serve you in some way. But it's kind of like if you've ever lost something in the dark, if you've ever been at the cinema and dropped something on the floor, or maybe in your car at night and you've dropped something and you're trying to find it. It's kind of like that rooting around to find the object that you're looking for. Um, if you're in your car and you drop something on the floor and the radio's on and there's somebody next to you talking to you, and then there's other things which are kind of thrown around the car. And let's say you're looking for, I don't know, your keys, your car keys. So you've dropped your car keys, the radio's on, somebody's talking to you, and you put your hand down to find your car keys. Now, you need to pay attention to what you're doing, because if you're focused on what the radio is telling you, or if you're focusing on the conversation with your friend, that's okay, but it'll take from your capacity to be able to find those keys, because you're not able to follow the movements of your hand. And then if, as you're moving your hand around, you come across a kid's toy or whatever else is thrown around the car, you can become distracted by those things and start, becoming entertained and identifying and associating yourselves with all the little things that you find on the car floor. But that will distract you from finding your car keys. So I think of contemplation pretty much like exploring a space where you're looking for something. You don't know where it is. You don't know what the answer is, but you'll know it when you find it. But in order to be able to find it, we need to be able to be concentrated, paying attention to where we're directing our focus. Because if we're not, then we're kind of just we can just be distracted by all the little things that are occurring, and we're not able to actually pay attention to the process, and we might pass over it without even knowing. So it's concentration and contemplation they come hand in hand. And there's an interesting convergence, I find, between the two of them, because there can be times contemplation culminates in samadhi, which is absorption. And in this state of absorption, there is a natural space that we're in where the object and the person observing it and the whole activity becomes one. And so there's that space where realizations take place. Now, it's just a case of where we are on the spectrum of samadhi. Is that like on an object of focus, on a gross object of focus? Is it on a subtle object of focus? Or is it on a more subtle object of focus, such as the single thought of I? And so that experience of absorption can be more profound or less profound. And the more profound it is, ultimately, will be the absorption in our state of pure conscious being, which is, to all extensive purposes, an experience of contemplation, because you're abiding in this state and it's purifying your being on a mental, emotional, and physical level. So through contemplation, we're actually establishing greater states of concentration. But we need concentration to be able to enter into a state of contemplation. So, in terms of meditation practice, it's easier to begin by cultivating concentration and then moving into a state of contemplation. However, concentration doesn't need to be absolutely perfected in order to be able to concentrate, or in order to be able to contemplate, because we can use contemplation as a way of concentrating as well. Now, I hope this makes sense, because the two words begin with con, and so we'll hopefully they're not becoming mixed up in your mind too much. But what I'm trying to say is essentially that the two are essential. Concentration is key because it's not something that we're usually adept at in just from living our lives. It's something that we need to become good at. However, we don't need to become perfected in it to be able to contemplate, because through the practice of contemplation, we are able to just refine our capacity to concentrate. The big issue with the whole process is that we are exposed to meditation and we're exposed to concentration techniques, tools to help us develop the capacity to concentrate. And we can become so preoccupied with those tools and at becoming very, very skilled in using those tools that we lose sight of the actual objective. And the objective is to be able to contemplate, because it's through contemplation that we're able to get into that space of the unknown. But if our sole goal is to become excellent at experiencing one pointed concentration as a result of our techniques, then that means that we're practicing the technique to the point that you're very, very, very focused on the technique itself. And that's great. You've established a fantastic state of concentrated focus, but it won't give you the same kind of intuitive insight that will come by just abiding in a concentrated state, which is allowing all concepts to dissolve, all definitions to dissolve, as a state where the unknown can make itself known to you. So when we're talking about um, looking around in the dark for something and trying to find something, um, we don't always know. We don't know where the thing is. So if we're talking about, if you're in a room and somebody puts you into a room and you'd never been in that room before, and it's dark, you're looking for the light switch. Where's the light switch? You don't know where the light switch is. So you're going to have to navigate your way around the room until you find that light switch. But it's an exploration. And through the exploration, you can find lots of different things which might be helpful to you or not helpful to you. Now, these are just analogies. They're not going to, they're not expected to give you great insight or anything, but it's just to give the idea that the whole process of contemplation is intuitive. It's not linear. It's most comparable to the creative process. You know, when we think of great artists, or artists in general of any kind, but I'm going to talk about the visual arts. If you take an artist and maybe they are through the process of looking for what they're going to paint next or what they're going to sculpt next, they might do multiple drawings and multiple sketches, and they'll analyze their subject matter, and they'll look for all the different angles and textures and shapes and colors and all those things to give them insight into their object. So they're very focused on what they're wishing to depict in terms of their subject matter. but they don't always know how it's going to translate into their final image. But they have those moments of where they're inspired, where it comes from within them. And although they can acknowledge that, yes, I did all these studies, preliminary studies, all these what we can compare to concentration techniques, to become very attuned to what they're doing, ultimately, it's a case of them being inspired for this knowledge to awaken within them. And this, it's kind of like the eureka moment, the oh, I've got it. Now I got it. Now I see it. So it's not linear. It's not a thought process. It's something which comes from somewhere where we can't put our finger on it, but it's a space where there's an intuitive knowing, and that knowing is becomes manifest in our cognitive minds. It could become, or becomes manifest to the point where we're able to um, understand it at a cellular level. We're able to embody it. It's no longer something which is hidden from us. It's something which is now made known to us, but we're not necessarily able to discuss it or talk about, or like the artist isn't able to say where they got their inspiration from. It's just, it translates onto the canvas. But other than that, that process that took them from their sketches to the canvas, that isn't something that they're necessarily going to be able to communicate. Um, Even on a simple level, sometimes when you're hungry and you're navigating the kitchen, you're exploring all the cupboards, or as we say here in Ireland, the presses, and you're looking in the fridge and you're looking on the shelves, you don't know what to eat. But there's a part of you which knows what it wants. And then when you finally do decide what you're going to eat, you go, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. You didn't know on a conscious level, but there's a part of you which did know. So it's a simple explanation, but that's the whole idea. The whole idea is that there's a reality which is unknown to us, which is at the core of our being, and it's where all information is. It's where all intelligence is. It's where all knowledge is, and it's what is giving rise to us. It's what's giving expression to us, but we're not attuned to it. And through the meditation process, we're trying to establish a state of concentrated awareness so that we can then enter into that space and contemplate uh, what answers might be lying there. And we can't make it happen, just like the artist can't make the painting be fantastic. We can't make it happen. It's going to present itself to us uh, when it's going to present itself to us. But we have to enter into that state in order for it to be able to present itself to us. Okay, so yeah, so what we're trying to do essentially is to balance the practice of concentration with contemplation. And when I talked in the first workshop in this program, we talked about samadhi as a spectrum, and we looked at the whole thing, and we looked at moving from gross objects to subtle objects. And so we defined two types of samadhi, savikalpa and nirvikalpa. So savikalpa was the state where our focus is going on an object of some kind, something which is keeping our focus. And nirvikalpa is when there's no thing, we're just focused on pure consciousness. We're focused on that space of absolute being, and that's where our consciousness is going. That's where our focus is going. And so we identified that the transition between savikalpa and nirvikalpa is the single layer, the single vritti, the single thought wave of I am. And so this is what is separating us from being able to focus on pure conscious being and focus on an object of focus. This is the transition. This is the point where we're able to move from focusing on something which is part of our reality of ignorance to focusing on something which is transcended that reality and is pure. So that layer is the hamkara. It's the sense of I-ness. So we need to go beyond this. So there's nothing to say that we can't sit down to meditate and focus on that directly. There's nothing to say that we can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to use as my point of focus the ahamkara, the sense of I, the sense, the reoccurring thought wave, the single vritti of I. And so we can focus on that as our object of focus. There's nothing to say we can't do that. Of course we can do that. In fact, Ramana Maharishi encouraged it, that that's what people would do. However, he also acknowledged, and it has been acknowledged by many, that it's just not always that easy for people to get into that space of very subtle concentration, in order to be able to focus on one single thought, the thought of I, because it's a very subtle vritti, and and we're endeavoring to stay focused on it and only it, to the point of its dissolution and its being transcended. So when we do sit down and we endeavor to focus our attention on this, what is likely to happen is that we become distracted by all the other vritti, all the other thought waves which are arriving. So it what yoga does is it offers the spectrum of samadhi as a means to knowing how to move from the most gross level of concentration to this subtle level of concentration, so that we're endeavoring to be able to contemplate the I thought. Now, as I mentioned before, and I mentioned in that workshop, it's not a linear process in terms of us having to always start at the very beginning and work to that point. And in our meditation practices that I've been opening with in the previous sessions, I've asked you to reflect on what your current state of mind was, because even at the beginning of this workshop, I asked you just to make that shift in consciousness, make that shift in attention to experiencing a state of clarified awareness. And sometimes we can do that and we can maintain it for a sustained period of time, where we would be able to just stay focused on the I thought. But it depends on how much meditation practice you've had. It depends on how frequent you are in your practices. It depends on many things. But no one, I can't tell you, as a group, how you should begin your meditation practices. It's explorative. It's explorative. You'll need to go about it yourself. But one thing is true, is that we're endeavoring to get into a space where we're no longer involved in meditation techniques. We're no longer endeavoring to use a technique. We're trying to get into a space where we are observing a process. So that's the subtle meditation practices, which lead to the subtle states of samadhi. And the one we're familiar with is focusing on the sound vibration. And so we can do that, focus on the sound vibration. But ultimately, we're trying to let that go too, because sometimes we can become so caught up on becoming perfected in listening to the sound vibration that it becomes almost like we cling to it. And so it could serve us better to abide in a space of stillness, and explore it and be open to it. Now, as I'm talking about this, it has to be noted that there's that contemplation with huge amounts of distraction isn't going to be very effective. And so this is where I say there's a merging of concentration and contemplation, because we may endeavor to focus our attention on something and or that pure stillness, and contemplate the pure stillness, endeavoring to get understanding and insight. But if we're constantly distracted, then it's not going to serve us. But we don't need to go to very gross levels of concentration techniques. We could return our attention to listening to the vibration, or if there's an inner light, we can focus on that. And they're so subtle that it's almost in the same way as you're paying attention to the single I current, you're just paying attention to the continuous sound current, which is continuously presenting itself to you. So listening to the vibration is very effective in terms of practicing concentration and contemplation at the same time. But ideally, we'll be able to move to a more subtle state where we're able to just focus on I without any other um, processes taking place. It's just one single thought and nothing else. And that's all we're going for. So, concentration is fundamental to be effective in contemplation. Um, and that's what yoga does. Yoga is like the system of yoga, the system of Raja Yoga has been designed and put together to all extensive purposes. It's been put together to allow us to move through from states of more distracted awareness to very, very subtle, refined states of concentration. And so they talk about when they talk about concentration, meditation, and samadhi, those three become one. Um, but the levels to which they're experienced can be very different. But all of them have benefit. It's just a case of us having to explore the process and trust it, and also be active in the process. So we set our intention for what we want to experience, and we're not just becoming um, used to having one experience and just sitting with that experience. We actually want to get it to the subtle states of being able to contemplate stillness, absolute stillness. That's where we want to be able to abide. And so yoga provides us that systematic approach to doing it. And there's lots of discussion about self-inquiry, and you'll hear different teachers, because self-inquiry it has been um, associated quite a bit with the kind of contemplation that happens in yoga. Jnana yoga is contemplation of our essence, contemplation of our true nature, and through discriminative awareness, we're endeavoring to awaken to those answers and to that understanding. But although self-inquiry is talked about quite a bit, and there's many books in it, the process of yoga allows us to prepare our bodies, our minds on an emotional and mental level to be able to enter into a state where we're able to contemplate with greater effectiveness. Yoga is working to refine our nervous system. It's working to establish greater flow of current into the higher brain centers. It's also helping to flush out all toxins from the cerebrospinal fluid, so that there's a more our bodies are purified of toxins. So it works on a physical level, but then it also works on an emotional and mental level. And we know this because we're hands-on dealing with the contents of the mind. When we sit to meditate, that's what's happening. We're coming face to face with the contents of our minds. So yoga is a systematic approach to allow us to move into a state of contemplative concentration. Okay. Um, Now, when you have achieved this state of concentrated focus and you're able to contemplate, we can contemplate anything essentially. When we're able to, when we've established the capacity to become absorbed in something. So whether it's on our gross object, subtle object, or more subtle object of focus, when we establish that skill in being able to bring our attention to such point that it's able to become absorbed in whatever it is we're focusing on, then we're able to gain insight and understanding into that object. So in terms of like how we go about contemplating things in our ordinary states of consciousness, we usually rationalize and follow a thought process and try to gain understanding in that way. So if somebody talks about, if they say, well, I'd like to gain understanding of addictive behaviors, and they're using their logical, rational mind, they can contemplate it in that way, in a very kind of mundane, worldly kind of way. And they can look through, well, it's because of this and this, and look at the different factors. But if we're able to absorb our attention into a concept, into an object, into something, then with that absolute absorption in that object, We don't, it's not a case of us getting answers through our thought processes. It's a case of answers being given to us, arising from within our intuitive nature, our inner knowing. And so they don't always come straight away, of course, but it's through the commitment to understanding something by identifying with it and becoming absorbed in it that we're able to gain the insight which is available. Because all knowledge is available to us. And not, but knowledge is extensive because it's been compartmentalized in myriads of ways. However, it is all there. It's all part of the same essential core. And so it's all available to us. But what we're really trying to do is understand and get to the bottom of why we as expressions are experiencing a state of separateness, why we don't naturally experience oneness. If we appreciate that there's one reality, and this one reality is intelligent and conscious, and it's given birth and given rise to all of creation, and then we are part of that creation, as in terms of our body mind expression, we're parts of that creation, then all that it is, we are too. It's just through the identification with the expression itself, by seeing ourselves as being the mind and body, we're not able to understand that we are actually the source. And so all the knowledge is part and parcel of what we are. It's just that we're too ignorant. We're identifying with the wrong aspects of reality in order to be able to have access to that information. And so we use contemplation to understand and get to the bottom of what are we separated from? Why are we separated from it? And how does that cause? Because that causes us a certain degree of suffering, of isolation, aloneness, a sense of uh, smallness and limitation. And so the ultimate is to contemplate our sense of individualization. That's what we want to contemplate. Because by transcending that which causes us to feel individual, separate, um, by understanding that, we're able to understand and dissolve. Um, we're able to dissolve away the the very concept, so that we're able to abide in experience which will be more illuminating, more enlightening. Now, it can all get very abstract at this point, because I'm talking in words about something which is impossible to put into words. But we're looking around in the dark. We're in that room on our own, looking around in the dark, and we feel alone. We feel isolated. And sure, there might be other people in the room looking around doing the very same thing. Um, but it's knowing that it's just one reality. It's just one reality. And that reality is born off and sustained by itself, in and of itself. And it gives expression to everything else. And everything that is expressed from it is looked after by it. Okay, so we use our capacity to concentrate as a means to contemplate that single thought of I, because it is the core of everything else. All the other thoughts that are arising in our mind, they only become important because that I thought identifies with them and makes them into something they're not, makes them bigger than they are, because it gives the I thought more power, more, more significance. But in that way, we are causing ourselves to move further and further away from the pure state of consciousness, which abides beyond the I thought. So Within our yoga practice, within our yoga meditation contemplative practice, we want to understand where is that I coming from? What's its source? And we want to get to the bottom of that. Um, uh, and by getting to the bottom of it, what we're doing is we're causing the very thought itself, that reoccurring thought of I, to just dissolve. And so what exists then is a pure state of consciousness because all the vritti have been disregarded and pure consciousness is expressing. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'm going to do a guided meditation practice. It might take 15 to 20 minutes. We might go over by a few minutes. I hope you don't mind. But it's just a way, the easiest way to explain this is to just give a direct experience. So if we just do a guided meditation practice, 15, 20 minutes, and hopefully this will give you a greater understanding for your own personal practice. So if you just take a comfortable upright position. Okay. Now just inhale deeply, filling your lungs. Exhale. And just one more time. And relax. Closing your eyes, allow your inner gaze to settle on your mind's eye. And look deep into your mind's eye. And become aware of your breathing, each inhalation and each exhalation as it naturally occurs. And continue to look deep into your mind's eye. It's natural for thoughts to arise. Simply disregard them, directing your focus to each inhalation and exhalation. And notice the transitions which occur between each inhalation and each exhalation, and again between each exhalation and each inhalation. There's a pause, there's an interval in breathing. Pay attention to this space, continuing to look deep into your mind's eye. And in each of these transitions, notice the space. the vastness of space, the depth of your mind. See your mind clearly, reflecting back to you pure, still, calm. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to move your attention from your mind's eye to your heart center. I'm going to ask you to follow your exhalation, your falling chest, until it stops, bringing you to your heart center. Continuing to pay attention to each inhalation and exhalation. On the following exhalation, follow your breath to your heart center. And allow your awareness to abide at this point. Your heart center is the source of the I thought. And pay attention to it as the only thought. Pay attention to the thought of I, which is recurring over and over and over. And this I thought, this is not a mantra. This is not a thought process. It's a space. It's a space for you to explore. Trust your intuition to guide you to the source of this reoccurring idea of I. The notion of I arises from this infinite space, unbounded, unlimited, undefined, without conceptions. This notion of I is what gives importance to all other thought waves. Allow your intuitive awareness to guide you to the source of this single thought wave, dissolving it so that you can experience oneness. To conclude our practice, we can become aware of our bodies, inhaling deeply, exhale, Just hear the sounds around you. Feel the chair beneath you. When you're ready, you can just open your eyes. Okay, that was a short contemplative meditation practice. The idea is just to give you an idea of how you can go about doing it yourself. You may have found that your mind was distracted and it was difficult for you to engage in that practice. You might need more time to establish a state of greater concentration before you endeavor to contemplate the I thought. And with that, I'm going to conclude the program. That's the 4 workshops finished. Before I sign off, I'm just going to paste into the comments section. I have a Facebook page, I have a YouTube page, and a Meetup page. And if it's of any help to you, you can have a look at them. Uh, Feel free to connect on Facebook. The Meetup that offers different events, workshops, meditation practices, and the YouTube channel. There's some videos there. Everything is in its infancy, so um, it'd be good to have your participation. Thank you very much, and I'm going to conclude with that. I trust that you found some merit in these workshops. Thank you.